took
Oh,
it.
you got it?
Yeah, it was like a trout.
Yeah.
I give up. Can you believe that?
Oh, look. Oh. Oh, you bastard!
Wasn't even looking. That's beautiful.
It's almost like a sea trout.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely. That is why I fish it.
Absolutely.
Oh,
But what a
Many different fishing styles and techniques are used in fly fishing, but most fishermen, when asked, will say that dry fly fishing is most fun. If one looks back at the history of fly fishing, there were times when dry fly fishing was regarded as more sporting than other methods, and in some waters all other techniques were forbidden. Today, all methods have the same status, but dry fly fishing is still special, and most fly fishermen dream of catching that giant trout on a dry fly.
Good man.
To learn more about the techniques of dry fly fishing, we've travelled to Norway and the Femundsmarken area. Here, the Femund River has good stocks of grayling, trout and whitefish. The excellent fishing in the river and the nearby mountain lakes is famous throughout Europe. The river offers fishing for everyone, from the choosy loner, who wants his favourite place all to himself, to the family, which wants more easily accessible spots. Johan Klingberg has been fly fishing for most of his life, and he's going to teach us the most important techniques needed to fish successfully with a dry fly.
The idea with the dry fly method is to imitate the insects that stays on top or in the surface. While there we can expect two different behaviors. One, while they mow like an egg-laying sedge female. The other, maybe most common way, is while they sit still on top of the surface and just follow the stream. Therefore, I think that the free drift presentation is one of the most important techniques for the dry fly fishermen to master. We have two different methods to present the fly free drifting. One is downstream presentation and the other is upstream presentation. This stream out here is a classic dry fly water with an unbroken surface with an even velocity, and we can expect to fish the dry flies very long drifts without any drag, and therefore the upstream method is a perfect method to use on these type of waters. So I will try to cover this bit by wading over to the other side and fish it bit by bit with the upstream method up to the stones that we have a bit further upstream there. And maybe, if we're lucky, might catch a grayling as well.
When using the upstream free drifting presentation method, cast the fly straight or diagonally upstream from your position. As the fly lands on the water, the tip of the rod should be close to the surface. As the fly floats downstream, the line must be taken in, so that you always have direct contact with the fly. When the fly reaches the fisherman, the drift has ended and a new cast is made. To keep the fly dry between drifts, Johan makes a few extra false casts before the fly's cast. the speeds of the current between the fly and the line are different, then there's a risk that the fly will start to drag, which means it moves against the direction of the current. As most newly hatched insects sit still on the surface of the water, the fish see a dragging fly as something unnatural. The grayling in the Femund River are in good shape, fighting fit, and weigh about half a kilo on average.
The downstream presentation is the other method as we have to master to become a good dry fly fisherman. And compared to the upstream method, we now present the fly downstream from the fisherman's position instead. This is a very, very nice technique to use on big open water like this here in the Trysil River. I like in particular to fish myself downstream bit by bit and cover a lot of water with the downstream method. Very nice technique and quite easy to learn as well. There was a rising fish.
The grayling extends its high back fin to use the power of the current against the fisherman. Sometimes fights can be long and the outcome uncertain. The downstream free drift presentation allows the fly to fish downstream from the fisherman. The cast divided into two stages. A high rod stop makes the line accelerate forwards at high speed. Then the tip of the rod is pulled back slowly so the cast collapses. The line will then form loose loops between the tip of the rod and the fly. As the fly drifts on the current, the loops will straighten out. When the current has stretched out all the line, the drift is over and a new cast is made. Remember, don't fish with a line longer than 6 to 7 meters. If it's any longer, then it will be difficult to strike if a fish takes at the start of a drift. Notice how quickly Johan accelerates the forward cast and follows up with a high rod stop. The fast acceleration and the sudden rod stop make the line bounce back and form itself into a slack loop on the water. It's hard to see fish feeding in the turbulent waters, but it often pays to blind fish these stretches with a high floating caddis imitation, such as a European 12 or a CDC and elk. In the middle of the current, a large still backwater has formed. The grayling can easily see a dry fly on the flat surface. By slowly moving downstream, Johan can cover the entire stretch efficiently with the help of the downstream method. Sometimes it's quite trying and difficult to make your way over the uneven riverbed, but this is soon forgotten when you're rewarded with a rising grayling. As afternoon glides over to evening, the number of mayflies increases. The best time of the day is soon upon us, when the female caddis appear over the river to lay their eggs. But before the fishing can continue, it's time to exchange the little CDC dry fly for a larger caddis instead. In the middle of the shallow river, a large, quiet and flat spot reveals a deep hole, and it's deep enough for even quite large fish. So as not to disturb or frighten the fish, Johan decides to fish the area with a fairly long line. Changing to a large caddis imitation was a success. From the feel and the twitching of the rod, this grayling seems to be a fairly big one.
Ui, ui.
evening slowly becomes night. But despite the long day, we join Johan at Isterfossen at the outlet of Lake Isteren to find out about night fishing on the river. The Nordic summer is short and intensive. It never really gets dark at night, so you can dry fly fish round the clock. Things are really moving out in the river and lots of fish are feeding. But in spite of this, it's not at all easy to fool them.
I have seen a couple of fairly good fish just outside here, breaking the surface a couple of times, but I'm not certain of what they actually feed on. Might be the sedge or maybe an emerger, not too sure about that. Therefore, I will give those fish an opportunity choice between two flies. One top dropper has imitated little sedge, CDC and elk, very good pattern. And about 40 centimeters below I have an imitation of a little emerger. So we'll try to cast these two flies on a line to give the fish a chance to choose between them. We'll see. It's not an easy job, but it's good fun.
The very next drift shows that Johan is on the right track. But the fish lets go, and the answer to what fly did it take will have to wait. Once again, the caddis, CDC and elk are triumphant in the summer night. It's been a long day, and tomorrow will be just as intensive when we try our luck on another stretch of the river.
CDC and elk.
In the small village of Snärta, the river's constricted and the current suddenly becomes faster. There's a deep edge following the riverbank just a few metres out, and the turbulent water makes it difficult to make a drag-free presentation. The caddisflies look for shelter from the wind among the large stones on the bank. They're newly hatched and waiting for the evening swarm. Depending on species, some caddis are hatched curled up on something solid, while others are hatched openly on the surface of the water.
When I once started with fly fishing, the only way to fish a dry fly was with a free drift presentation. To fish a dry fly dragging against the stream was nearly a sin. And this was the situation in the whole north part of Europe, all since the beginning of the modern dry fly fishing. But if we take a look to the south part of Europe, to countries like Italy or Austria, or perhaps across the Atlantic Ocean to the eastern part of America, people here started to develop alternative dry fly methods very, very early. One of these methods was the skittering method, which was about to present a dry fly as a living insect just above the surface. And the idea here was to imitate an egg-laying sedge female, perhaps. To do this, we have two methods. One with one single fly on a short leader. The other method is with two flies, which is my favorite method actually. I have a wet fly at the point, and about 1.5 meters up on the leader I have a dropper of, let's say, 30 centimeters, where I have a very bushy dry fly. The idea is to let the wet fly hang across the stream and lift the leader, so I have the dry fly above the surface, and by lowering and lift the rod tip can get the dry fly to bounce against the surface like an egg-laying sedge female actually. Great technique to use, which I like very, very much to do.
Cast the flies downstream of where you think the fish are lying. When the flies hit the water, the tip of the rod should be at its lowest. By slowly raising the tip, the flies will move upstream. The whole line and the leader must be held just high enough above the surface so that the fly on the dropper reaches the surface. The line will only be kept taut if the current provides enough resistance for the wet fly. When the tip of the rod is vertical, the cast is finished and must be repeated. If you carefully shake the tip of the rod back and forth sideways, a wave-like movement is transmitted via the line out to the leader and the dropper. The irrational, wandering movement of the fly imitates the egg-laying of a female caddis and can usually attract the most reluctant trout or grayling. The river is difficult to read, with no obvious backwaters or edges of currents to fish, but there are still lots of interesting places to fish out in the river. Along the indistinct edges of the currents, fast and slow surface waters meet, and it's there the insects are caught and led further on downstream to provide the smorgasbord. And there are also one or two still, flat patches where a fish might see a skating dry fly. Even though the fishing hasn't really got going, the grayling couldn't resist rising for the skating dry fly. The morning's fishing with the skaters in the faster flowing parts of the river has been pleasant, and we've been rewarded with a really good grayling.
Yes.
We return to the outlet of the Isteren to see if the afternoon fishing has started. One or two fish are breaking the surface of a backwater. The still, flat surface gives the fish plenty of time to examine the fly, so it's to your advantage if you can present the fly with as long a drift as possible.
Here at the head of Isterforsen, a lot of food comes in from the big lake Isteren here above. Fish knows about it, and sometimes a lot of grayling are piling up all over the stream, waiting for the meal to be served. Fishermen knows about it as well, and Therefore, this stream has been a classic water, as have been attracted of fly fishermen from all over Europe since ages. Even bottom gives an even current, and I will try to fish this even current with a combination of the two free drift presentations, as we already have been seen. Upstream, mend over and continue the drift with the downstream method. This gives a very, very long presentation without any drag. A good technique to use on open water like this with an even speed, even current.
The method is a combination of both the upstream and downstream techniques and is used to give the fly as long a free drift stretch as possible. Start with the upstream free drift method and let the fly follow the current down towards you. By lifting the rod at the same pace as the current, you'll always be in direct contact with the fly. When the fly is level with the fisherman, the tip of the rod should be at its highest. Before letting the fly carry on downstream, the line must be mended upstream. This means that both the fly line and the leader are cast upstream of the fly. But remember, only the line is lifted when mending. The fly must stay on the surface. When the line has been mended, so that it now follows the current behind the fly, carry on fishing according to the downstream method. A grayling has been feeding a few times on the still flat surface. The rises are neat and the surface is hardly broken when the fish comes up. As there are no dead mayflies on the surface, we assume the fish is taking small hatching mayfly nymphs. The fish seems to ignore everything we're showing it, so it's time to change the caddis for a small F-fly with an olive-coloured body. Success at last. The grayling doesn't hesitate to take the low-lying CDC dry fly. When the fish are choosy, like today, cracking the code gives you a great feeling of satisfaction. None of the feeding fish out in the river hesitate to take the fly. It's at these moments that dry fly fishing is at its best, providing pleasant memories to be recalled and enjoyed during the dark months of winter. The Femund River has given us 2 wonderful days of delight, dry fly fishing very active fish. This is definitely not the last time we'll be visiting these marvellous grayling waters.